Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to Her True Stories. Before we dive deeper into Bridget's story, I want to share something that might speak directly to your heart. If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. And if Bridget's fierce love and protective instincts are resonating with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories of women who refuse to be victims. My name is Bridget Stanley, and at 64 years old, I thought I had seen every cruel thing this world could offer. I was wrong. The cruelest blow came at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in October, when my phone rang with the kind of call that splits your life into before and after. Mrs. Stanley? This is Dr. Patterson at St. Mary's Hospital. Your daughter Lauren has been admitted to our intensive care unit. I was instantly awake, my feet already finding the floor beside my bed. The silk nightgown I wore, pale blue, Martin's favorite color, suddenly felt like ice against my skin. What happened? Is she hurt? She delivered her baby 6 hours ago, but there were complications. She's gone into cardiac arrest. We have her stabilized for now, but... The doctor's paws stretched like a knife blade. You need to come immediately. I was dressed and in my car within 10 minutes, my long gray hair hastily pinned back, my pearl necklace, Martin's last gift before his death 2 years ago, lying against my throat like armor. The highways were empty at that hour, just me and the pre-dawn darkness racing toward the only child I had left. Lauren. My beautiful, gentle Lauren, who had married that worthless man against my better judgment, who was now fighting for her life while bringing his child into the world. The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and despair. I had walked these halls before when Martin was dying, and the scent brought back memories I had worked hard to bury. But this was different. This was my daughter, my only child, lying in that bed with machines breathing for her. Mrs. Stanley? A young nurse approached me, her scrubs wrinkled from what had clearly been a long night.
I'm Evelyn Marks.
I've been caring for your daughter. How is she? I asked, though I could see Lauren through the glass door, small and pale against the white sheets, connected to more machines than seemed possible for one human body. Stable but critical. The delivery was difficult, and her heart couldn't handle the stress. We're monitoring her closely. Nurse Marks glanced at her clipboard, then back at me. We've been trying to reach her husband, but what? His phone goes straight to voicemail. We found his emergency contact information, tried multiple numbers. Nothing. Something cold settled in my chest. When was the last time anyone spoke to him? Yesterday evening, before the delivery started. He said he had to step out for something work-related. She hesitated. Mrs. Stanley, where is he? That was the question, wasn't it? Where was Trent Mallory while his wife fought for her life and his newborn daughter lay in the NICU, too small and too early? I excused myself and stepped into the hallway, pulling out my phone with hands that were steadier than they should have been. I called Trent's number, straight to voicemail, just as the nurse had said. I hung up and dialed again. Same result. By the third attempt, something inside me had shifted from worry to suspicion, and by the fifth, suspicion had crystallized into something much darker. I opened my banking app, the one connected to the joint account that Lauren and Trent shared, the account I had set up for them as a wedding gift and still had access to for emergencies. What I saw there made my blood turn to ice water. Charges from Las Vegas. Multiple charges. Hotels, restaurants, and casinos. Lots of casinos. The timestamp on the most recent charge was from 2 hours ago, long after Lauren had been rushed to the ICU, long after any decent husband would have been racing to his wife's bedside. I scrolled through more charges, each one like a slap across the face. Champagne at the Bellagio. Room service at Caesar's Palace. High-limit poker tables at the Venetian. All while his wife was dying and his daughter was fighting for every breath in a plastic box. But the final insult, the one that made my hands shake with rage, was a charge at Victoria's Secret. Expensive lingerie. The kind no man buys for a wife who just gave birth. I tried calling one more time, but this time something different happened. A woman answered. Hello. The voice was young, breathy, slightly drunk. I could hear music in the background, laughter, the distinctive sounds of a casino floor. Who is this? I asked, though I already knew. Who's this? The voice shot back, giggling. Trent, baby, someone's calling your phone. I heard him in the background, sharp and panicked. Hang up. Hang up right now. The line went dead. I stood in that hospital corridor for exactly 30 seconds, letting the reality wash over me.
My daughter was dying.
His daughter was struggling to survive. And Trent Mallory was in Las Vegas with some woman, gambling away their future while his family fell apart. Most people would have cried. Most people would have screamed. Most people would have called him back and demanded explanations, begged him to come home, appealed to whatever conscience he might have had buried somewhere in his worthless soul. I am not most people. I walked back to the ICU, kissed my daughter's forehead through the maze of tubes and wires, and whispered, "Don't worry, sweetheart. Mama's going to handle everything." Then I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and opened my laptop. If Trent Mallory thought he could gamble while my daughter's life hung by a thread, then I would show him what a real gamble looked like. And unlike him, I never lose. At 4 a.m., with Lauren stabilized but still critical, I sat in my home office with banking statements spread across my mahogany desk. The room smelled of the roses I'd cut from my garden the day before, back when I still believed in the basic decency of the man my daughter had married. The credit card charges told a story more sordid than anything I could have imagined. The Vegas trip wasn't spontaneous. It had been planned for weeks. Hotel reservations made 3 weeks ago. Flights booked under 2 names, Trent Mallory and Roxanne Vale.
Roxane Vale.
Even her name sounded like something from a cheap romance novel. I did what any intelligent woman with resources and motivation would do. I researched everything I could find about this woman. Social media profiles, employment records, financial connections. By 6 a.m., I had a complete picture of my daughter's husband's betrayal. The photos were time-stamped on social media. They were laughing and toasting with champagne at the exact moment Lauren was being rushed into emergency surgery. The images showed Trent and his mistress at poolside tables, her in a bikini that cost more than some people's rent, him in designer swim trunks that I recognized because Lauren had bought them for his birthday last month. But the final photo was the one that sealed his fate. Trent and Roxanne in a passionate embrace beside a roulette table, her hands tangled in his hair, his wedding ring clearly visible as he groped her like a teenager. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. 4 hours after Lauren had flatlined and been resuscitated. I printed every photo, saved every receipt, documented every lie. Then I made myself a cup of tea and called the hospital for an update. Your daughter had a stable night, Nurse Marks told me. No changes, but that's actually good news at this point. Has her husband called or shown up?
No, ma'am.
Still no word from him. After hanging up, I opened my laptop again and accessed the joint account one more time. Trent had charged another $5,000 at a poker table at 2 a.m. My daughter's husband was literally gambling away their future while she fought for her life. That's when I made my first move. With a few clicks, I transferred every penny from the joint account into Lauren's personal account, an account only she had access to. $47,000. Their entire savings, including the money I had gifted them for the down payment on their house, plus Lauren's inheritance from her father. Then I canceled his credit cards. All of them. The ones tied to the joint account, the ones I had co-signed for when his credit was too poor to qualify on his own, even the business card his company had issued that was backed by our family's guarantee. By 7 a.m., Trent Mallory was stranded in Las Vegas with whatever cash he had in his wallet and whatever was left of his credit line at the tables. I estimated he had maybe $300 to his name. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown Nevada number. The credit card was declined. There must be some mistake. I deleted it without responding. Another text 5 minutes later. Bridget, this is Trent. There's something wrong with the cards. Can you call the bank?
Delete.
By 8 a.m., my phone was buzzing every few minutes. Text after text, growing increasingly frantic. The hotel says they can't process payment for the room. Bridget, please call me back. This is urgent. I don't understand what's happening. The accounts show zero balance. Bridget, answer your phone. I turned the phone to silent and went to visit Lauren. She looked so small in that hospital bed, surrounded by machines and monitors. But her color was slightly better, and the nurse told me her vitals had stabilized overnight. She's a fighter, Nurse Mark said with a gentle smile. Just like her mother, I'd guess. If only she knew. I spent the morning beside Lauren's bed, holding her hand and reading to her from the book of poetry we had shared when she was young. The same poems her father had read to her when she was small. The same poems that had comforted us both when Martin died and left us alone to face the world. By noon, my phone showed 67 missed calls from various Nevada numbers, plus dozens of text messages. The final text, received at 11:43 a.m., simply read, I know what you did. I smiled and typed back my first and only response. Good. At 2 p.m., I was still at Lauren's bedside when my phone rang. Not a Vegas number this time, this was local. I recognized it as Trent's boss, Sterling Drake, the vice president of commercial development at Morrison and Associates. Mrs. Stanley? This is Sterling Drake. I hope Lauren is doing well. Thank you for asking, Sterling. She's fighting, but she's stable. I'm calling about Trent. He was supposed to be in an important client meeting this morning, but he never showed up. We can't reach him, and frankly, we're concerned. I let the silence stretch for exactly 3 beats. Sterling, I need to share something with you that's rather delicate. 20 minutes later, Sterling Drake had heard the entire story. I had emailed him the photographs, the banking records, the timeline showing exactly where Trent had been while his wife fought for her life. I had also sent him copies of the credit card charges that showed Trent financing his affair with money that was supposed to be securing his family's future. Mrs. Stanley, Sterling said, his voice tight with disgust, I want you to know that Morrison and Associates does not tolerate this kind of behavior from our employees. The company has a morality clause in our contracts, and what you've shown me. I understand completely, Sterling. A company's reputation is everything.
Exactly.
And I want you to know that effective immediately, Trent Mallory is no longer employed with our firm. We'll be reviewing all of his client accounts and recent transactions as well. After hanging up, I leaned back in the uncomfortable hospital chair and closed my eyes. In less than 12 hours, I had reduced Trent Mallory from a successful businessman with a beautiful wife and newborn daughter to an unemployed adulterer stranded in Las Vegas with his credit destroyed and his reputation in ruins. And I was just getting started. My phone buzzed with another call from Nevada. This time I answered. Bridget. Trent's voice was ragged, desperate. What the hell have you done? I've done exactly what any mother would do when her daughter's husband abandons her while she's dying. I didn't abandon her. I was going to come back.
When?
After you'd lost all of Lauren's inheritance at the poker table? After you'd bought your mistress a few more expensive gifts. That's not How did you? You're unemployed, Trent. Sterling Drake called me personally to let me know that Morrison and Associates has terminated your contract effective immediately. The silence on the other end was so complete, I thought he'd hung up. You can't do this to me, he finally whispered. I already have. And unless you're on a plane back to Portland within the next 4 hours, things are going to get much, much worse for you. This is insane. I'm your son-in-law. No, I said, my voice colder than I had ever heard it. You were my son-in-law. Now you're just the man who abandoned my daughter when she needed you most. You have 4 hours, Trent. Use them wisely. I hung up and immediately blocked his number. By 5 p.m., Nurse Marks told me that Lauren's condition had improved enough that they were cautiously optimistic about her recovery. Her heart rate was steady, her brain scans looked good, and she had even squeezed my hand during one of the sedation breaks. By 6 p.m., my phone started ringing from unknown numbers again. Trent had apparently found other ways to reach me. I answered on the 10th call. 4 hours are up, I said before he could speak. Bridget, please listen to me. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I love Lauren. I love my daughter. We can work this out. Where are you right now, Trent?
I'm
at the airport. I'm trying to get a flight, but my cards aren't working, and I need. Goodbye, Trent. I hung up and smiled. He was going to have to find his own way home from his little gambling vacation. And when he arrived, if he managed to scrape together enough money for a ticket, he was going to discover that his troubles were only beginning. Because what Trent didn't know was that I had already made another phone call. This one to an old friend of mine who happened to work at the district attorney's office. Some stories about family abandonment, financial fraud, and moral bankruptcy needed to be told to the right people. And I knew exactly the right people to tell. Thursday morning brought news that lifted my spirits immeasurably. Lauren had been moved out of the ICU and into a regular room. She was still weak, still connected to monitors, but her eyes were open and she was asking about her baby. About Clara, the tiny miracle who had arrived 3 weeks early, but was gaining strength every day in the NICU. Where's Trent? She asked me, her voice barely a whisper. I smoothed her hair back from her face, the same gesture I'd used to comfort her as a child. He's handling some business matters, sweetheart. Don't worry about anything except getting better. She frowned slightly. I thought I heard him talking to someone on the phone before the delivery started. About Las Vegas? But that doesn't make sense. Rest now, I said gently. Everything is being taken care of. And it was. While Lauren slept, I was methodically destroying the life of the man who had nearly destroyed hers. My phone had been quiet since Tuesday evening. No more desperate calls from Nevada numbers. No more frantic text messages. I assumed Trent was either on his way back or had found some other way to fund his extended vacation. Either way, his silence wouldn't last long. At 2 p.m., I was proven right. I was in the hospital cafeteria, forcing myself to eat a sandwich I couldn't taste, when commotion erupted near the main entrance. Raised voices, security guards moving quickly, the kind of disturbance that makes everyone stop and stare. And there, in the middle of it all, was Trent Mallory. He looked like he'd been dragged behind a bus. His expensive clothes were wrinkled and stained, his hair unwashed, stubble covering his usually immaculate face. He was arguing loudly with a security guard, gesturing wildly with hands that shook from what I recognized as either exhaustion or withdrawal. I need to see my wife. She's in room 314, Lauren Stanley Mallory. She just had my baby. Sir, you need to calm down and check in at the information desk. I don't have time for that. I've been trying to get here for 2 days. My credit cards were stolen, my job. His voice cracked. Please, I just need to see my family. I stood up slowly, straightened my pearl necklace, and walked toward the scene. As I approached, Trent saw me, and his expression shifted from desperate relief to something much darker. Bridget. Thank God. Tell them I'm Lauren's husband. Tell them to let me upstairs." I looked at him for a long moment. This man who had gambled while my daughter flatlined, who had groped his mistress while his wife fought for her life, who had abandoned his newborn daughter for casino tables and expensive champagne. "I'm sorry," I said to the security guard, my voice carrying clearly across the lobby, "but I don't recognize this person." Trent's face went white. "What are you talking about?" "Bridget, tell them who I am." I turned to face him fully, letting him see the ice in my eyes. My daughter's husband would never have left her side during a medical emergency. My daughter's husband would have been here when she nearly died bringing his child into the world. "So no, I don't know who you are. You can't do this." Trent lunged toward me, but the security guard quickly stepped between us. "She's lying. I'm Lauren Stanley Mallory's husband. I have rights." "Sir, I need you to step back." "I have rights." Trent screamed, and I watched with satisfaction as every person in the lobby turned to stare at his public breakdown. "She stole my money. She got me fired. She's trying to keep me from my own family." The security guard was joined by two others, and they began escorting Trent toward the exit. But he wasn't finished making a scene. "This isn't over, Bridget," he shouted over his shoulder. "I know what you did. I'll prove it. I'll get my money back. I'll get my job back. I'll—" The automatic doors closed on his threats, leaving the lobby in uncomfortable silence. I smoothed my skirt, thanked the security guards for their professionalism, and walked calmly back toward the elevators. But I wasn't heading to Lauren's room. I was going to see the hospital's chief administrator, a woman I'd known for years through various charity events and social circles. 20 minutes later, I sat across from Margaret Steinberg in her corner office, sharing the same photographs and documentation I'd shown Sterling Drake 2 days earlier. "Mrs. Stanley," Margaret said, her voice heavy with disgust, "this is absolutely appalling. And he caused a scene in our lobby?" "I'm afraid so." He was quite loud and aggressive. Several patients and families witnessed his behavior. Margaret shook her head. "Given what you've shown me, and given his conduct today, I'm going to issue a temporary restraining order barring him from hospital property pending a full review. Patient safety is our primary concern." I think that's very wise. I'll also be sharing this information with our legal department and social services. If there are concerns about domestic instability or potential harm to the infant. I nodded gravely. Lauren's recovery has to be our priority. And little Clara is so vulnerable right now. After leaving Margaret's office, I made one more stop before returning to Lauren's room. The hospital chapel was empty, peaceful, smelling of candles and old wood. I sat in a front pew and allowed myself 5 minutes of what might have been prayer, or might have been meditation. Then I pulled out my phone and made the call I'd been planning since Tuesday morning. "Detective Services, this is Detective Haverford." "Hello, Detective. My name is Bridget Stanley, and I need to report financial fraud and child endangerment." Friday morning brought a phone call I hadn't expected, but probably should have anticipated. "Mrs. Stanley? This is Roxanne Vale. I think we need to talk." I was in Lauren's hospital room, helping her practice holding Clara for the first time since the delivery when the call came. My daughter was finally strong enough to care for her baby properly, and watching them together filled me with a contentment that had been missing since this nightmare began. "Ms. Vale," I said calmly, stepping into the hallway. "How interesting to hear from you. Look, I know you probably hate me and I get that. But I need you to know something about Trent." "I think I know quite enough about Trent already." "No, you don't." Her voice was sharp, desperate. "He's been calling me nonstop since he got back to Portland. He wants me to lie for him, to say that you somehow set him up, to help him get back at you." I found myself genuinely curious. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him to go to hell." There was satisfaction in her voice. "See, Trent thought he was so smart, thought he was using me just like he was using everyone else. But I've been around men like him my whole life, and I know how to protect myself. What does that mean? It means I recorded everything. Every conversation we had about his money problems, about his plans to take money from his company account, about how he was planning to leave Lauren after the baby was born and move to Vegas with me. I felt my pulse quicken. You recorded him? Honey, I learned a long time ago that married men lie about everything. So I recorded every conversation, saved every text message, took pictures of every expensive gift he bought me with money that wasn't his. Why are you telling me this? Because he threw me under the bus the second things got difficult. He left me stranded in Vegas with a hotel bill I couldn't pay, and when I called him for help, he told me I was on my own. Her voice turned bitter. 3 months of promises about how he was going to leave his wife and marry me, and the moment he needed to choose between me and saving his own skin, he chose himself. Ms. Vale, what exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that you and I help each other. You want to destroy him? I've got everything you need. Hours of recordings, hundreds of text messages, receipts for every dollar he spent on me. I was quiet for a moment, processing this unexpected development. What do you want in return? I want him to pay me back the money he owes me. He promised to reimburse me for my half of the Vegas expenses, plus he borrowed $5,000 from me last month that he never paid back. How do I know you're telling the truth about these recordings? Because I'm about to send you a sample. Check your email in 5 minutes. Sure enough, 5 minutes later I had an email from Roxanne with an audio file attached. I put in my earbuds and listened to a conversation between her and Trent that was even more damning than I could have hoped. Trent's voice, slurred slightly with alcohol. The company account has plenty of money in it. They'll never notice a few thousand here and there. I'll put it back before anyone realizes it's gone. Roxanne, what if you can't win it back at the tables? Trent, then I'll blame it on someone else. My boss loves me. He'll believe whatever I tell him. Roxanne, what about Lauren? What if she finds out? Trent, Lauren's too stupid to understand business finances. Besides, after the baby comes, she'll be too busy with diapers and crying to pay attention to anything else. Roxanne, and if your mother-in-law gets suspicious? Trent, that old witch?
Please.
She might have money, but she's just a grieving widow who doesn't understand how the modern world works. I'll handle her if she becomes a problem. I stopped the recording and sat down hard in the nearest chair. The casual cruelty in Trent's voice, the way he talked about Lauren and me, the sheer arrogance of his plans, it was worse than anything I had imagined. I called Roxanne back immediately. Ms. Vale, I've listened to your sample. How much more do you have?
Hours.
And it gets worse. He talked about taking money from company accounts, about using Lauren's inheritance money for his gambling debts, about leaving her after the baby was born so he wouldn't have to pay child support. You recorded him saying he planned to abandon his child? More than once. He said having a baby was Lauren's idea and he wasn't going to let it ruin his life. He said once we moved to Vegas together, he'd be free of all his responsibilities. I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. Any lingering doubt I might have had about the rightness of my actions disappeared completely. Ms. Vale, I want everything you have. Every recording, every text message, every piece of evidence. And my money? I'll make sure you're compensated for your cooperation. But I want to be very clear about something. This isn't about helping you get revenge on Trent. This is about protecting my daughter and granddaughter from a man who has proven he's dangerous to their welfare. I understand. And honestly, after hearing him talk about his wife and baby the way he did, after seeing how he just abandoned them when things got real, I'm glad to help you destroy him. 2 hours later, Roxanne Vale was sitting in Detective Cole Haverford's office with her laptop, her phone, and a box of printed documents that chronicled 3 months of Trent's criminal planning and moral bankruptcy. I sat beside her as she played recording after recording for the detective. Trent's voice filled the small room, laying out his schemes, boasting about his ability to manipulate everyone around him and expressing his complete lack of regard for his family's welfare. "This is extraordinary," Detective Haverford said after the fourth recording. "Mr. Mallory essentially confessed to premeditated fraud, embezzlement, and intent to abandon his family." "There's more," Roxanne said, pulling up text messages on her phone. "Look at this one from 2 weeks ago." She showed us a text from Trent that read, "Elle is getting too big and whiny. Can't wait to be done with this whole pregnancy thing and get back to having fun. After the baby comes, I'm thinking of moving to Vegas permanently. You interested in a permanent arrangement?" Roxanne had responded, "What about your family?" Trent's reply, "What about them? I never wanted kids anyway. This was all Lauren's idea. Once I'm in Vegas, they can't touch me for child support." Detective Haverford was taking notes furiously. "Ms. Vale, you understand that this evidence will be used in court? You'll need to testify about how you obtained these recordings." "I understand. And I want to make something clear. I didn't know he was planning to abandon his wife and baby when I got involved with him. He told me his marriage was already over, that they were just staying together until after the delivery. But these recordings suggest otherwise. These recordings prove he's a liar who is playing all of us. He lied to me, he lied to his wife, he lied to his employer, and he was planning to lie to the courts to avoid paying child support." After we left the police station, I drove Roxanne to her hotel. She was staying at a budget motel near the airport, a far cry from the luxury accommodations Trent had promised her. "Ms. Vale," I said as she got out of the car, "I want to thank you for doing the right thing." "Don't thank me. I'm not doing this to be noble. I'm doing this because he used me and then threw me away when it became convenient. Nevertheless, your evidence will help ensure that Lauren and Clara are protected from him permanently." She paused with her hand on the car door. "Mrs. Stanley, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How did you know to move so fast? How did you know to freeze his accounts and get him fired before he could do more damage?" I looked at her through the window. This young woman who had been used by the same man who had tried to destroy my family. "Ms. Vale, I've been alive for 64 years. I've raised a daughter, buried a husband, and built the life that I'm proud of. In all that time, I've learned one very important lesson." "What's that?" "When someone shows you who they really are, believe them immediately. And when someone threatens your family, destroy them before they can destroy you." Monday morning brought the moment I had been waiting for since that first phone call from the hospital. I was feeding Clara in the NICU when Detective Haverford appeared at my side. "Mrs. Stanley, we have arrest warrants for Trent Mallory. Financial fraud, embezzlement, child abandonment, and criminal negligence. With Ms. Vale's recordings and your documentation, the district attorney feels we have more than enough evidence for conviction." I looked down at my granddaughter, sleeping peacefully in my arms, completely unaware that justice was finally being served. "Where will you find him?" "He's been staying at the Riverside Motel since Wednesday. We'll execute the warrants this afternoon." At 3 p.m., I was in Lauren's room when my phone rang. Detective Haverford's name appeared on the screen. "Mrs. Stanley, Trent Mallory has been arrested without incident. He's being processed now, and his initial appearance is scheduled for tomorrow morning." I felt a profound sense of satisfaction settle over me. What charges will he face? All of them. The evidence is overwhelming. The DA is confident about securing convictions on every count. And bail. Given the flight risk, his plans to move to Las Vegas permanently, and the seriousness of the charges, we'll be asking for significant bail or remand. That evening, Lauren finally felt strong enough to ask the hard questions. Mom, where is Trent? Really? The nurses keep giving me strange looks and nobody will give me a straight answer. I sat down beside her bed and took her hand. Sweetheart, Trent has been arrested. Her face went pale. Arrested? For what? I told her everything. The Las Vegas trip with his mistress while she was in labor. The gambling with their savings while she fought for her life. The recordings where he planned to abandon her and Clara permanently. The theft from his company account to finance his affair. Lauren listened in silence, tears streaming down her face. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. I knew something was wrong, she finally whispered. For months, I knew. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way he looked at me when I was pregnant, like I was ruining his life. It's not your fault that you trusted your husband. But I should have seen it. I should have protected myself, protected Clara. No, I said firmly. He should have been trustworthy. He should have honored his vows. The failure here isn't yours, it's his. She was quiet again, processing everything I'd told her. What happens now? Now you focus on getting better and taking care of Clara. The legal system will handle Trent. How long could he go to prison for? Detective Haverford says 8 to 12 years, given the amounts involved and the aggravating circumstances. Lauren looked shocked. That long? He stole money from his company, abandoned his wife during a medical emergency, and was planning to disappear to avoid child support. What part of that suggests he deserves mercy? That night, I sat in the hospital chapel and reflected on everything that had transpired. In less than a week, I had gone from a grieving mother watching her daughter fight for her life to an instrument of justice, ensuring that the man who had caused that fight would pay appropriately for his crimes. Some people might call it revenge. I called it protection. Protection for Lauren, protection for Clara, protection for any future women who might be foolish enough to trust Trent Mallory with their hearts or their futures. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Haverford. Bail hearing tomorrow at 10 a.m. Thought you'd like to know. His attorney is asking for a plea deal already. I texted back. What kind of deal? Reduced charges in exchange for full restitution. The DA wants to know how the victims feel about that. I stared at the phone for a long moment, then typed my response. The victims want full prosecution. No deals. Justice, I had learned, wasn't about forgiveness or mercy. It was about consequences matching actions. And Trent Mallory's actions demanded consequences that would ensure he never again had the opportunity to destroy another family the way he had tried to destroy mine. 3 weeks after Clara's birth, Lauren was finally ready to come home. The doctors had cleared both her and the baby, and I had spent the time preparing my house to accommodate 3 generations of Stanley women. I had converted my late husband Martin's study into a nursery, complete with the finest crib money could buy, and a rocking chair positioned by the window, where I could watch my granddaughter sleep in the afternoon sunlight. Lauren would stay in her childhood bedroom until she was strong enough to make decisions about her future. But first, there was the matter of Trent's trial. Detective Haverford called me on a Tuesday morning as I was preparing breakfast for Lauren. She was sitting at my kitchen table, finally looking like herself again. Color returned to her cheeks and strength back in her voice. Mrs. Stanley, I wanted to update you on the case. The district attorney has decided to move forward with all charges against Mr. Mallory. What charges specifically? Criminal fraud in the first degree, embezzlement, child abandonment, and criminal negligence. With Ms. Vale's recordings and your documentation, we have more than enough evidence for conviction. I set down my coffee cup carefully. And what kind of sentence might he be looking at? Given the amounts involved and the aggravating circumstances, abandoning his family during a medical emergency, planning to avoid child support, we're looking at 10 to 15 years in state prison. Lauren looked up sharply from her cereal. She had been listening to my side of the conversation, and I could see the shock in her eyes. "Detective," I said, "when will this go to trial?" "The preliminary hearing is scheduled for next month. If he doesn't plead guilty, the trial would be sometime in early spring." After I hung up, Lauren and I sat in silence for a long moment. Clara was sleeping in her bouncer beside the table, tiny fist curled against her cheek, completely oblivious to the legal proceedings that would determine her father's fate. 10 to 15 years, Lauren said quietly. "That's what happens when you steal from your employer and abandon your family," I replied. "Mom, I know what he did was terrible. I know he betrayed all of us. But Clara is going to grow up without a father." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Sweetheart, Clara was never going to have a real father anyway. Trent made that clear in his recordings. He was planning to abandon both of you after she was born. But maybe if he went to counseling or if we tried family therapy." "Lauren." I kept my voice gentle but firm. "Listen to me very carefully. This isn't about punishment for punishment's sake. This is about protecting you and Clara from a man who has proven he cannot be trusted with your welfare." Before Lauren could answer, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Trent's mother, Patricia Mallory. I answered on the third ring. "Hello, Patricia." "Bridget, we need to talk." Her voice was strained, older than I remembered. "About Trent, about the charges, about our granddaughter." "What about them? You can't seriously intend to go through with this prosecution. Trent made mistakes, yes, but destroying his life isn't going to help anyone." I walked into the living room, away from Lauren's hearing. "Patricia, your son stole money, abandoned his wife and newborn daughter, and was planning to disappear to Las Vegas permanently. Those aren't mistakes, they're choices. He was under pressure. The gambling got out of hand, but he can get help. He was under pressure, so he decided to steal from his company and cheat on his pregnant wife? That's your defense. Bridget, please. He's our only child. If he goes to prison for that long, his life is over." His life was over the moment he chose gambling and his mistress over his family. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Patricia spoke again, her voice was pleading. "What do you want? Money? We can pay restitution for whatever he stole. We can get him into treatment. We can make this right. You can't make abandoning a dying wife right, Patricia. You can't make planning to desert your newborn daughter right. And you certainly can't make stealing from your employer right. I don't believe he would do those things. Then you're welcome to attend the trial and hear the recordings for yourself. But I should warn you. What you hear might change how you feel about your son permanently." I hung up and returned to the kitchen, where Lauren was feeding Clara. "That was Trent's mother," I said. "What did she want?" "The same thing everyone wants when they're caught doing something wrong: forgiveness, without consequences." Lauren looked down at Clara, who was gripping her mother's finger with surprising strength. "Mom, what if we're wrong? What if there's some explanation we haven't considered?" I sat back down across from my daughter and spoke with all the love and firmness I could muster. "Lauren, honey, I want you to imagine something for me. Imagine that 10 years from now, Clara comes to you and tells you that her husband gambled away their savings, cheated on her while she was pregnant, and abandoned her during a medical emergency. What would you tell her to do?" Lauren was quiet for a long time. "I'd tell her to leave him. And if she said she wanted to try to work it out? If she said maybe he deserved another chance? I'd tell her that someone who could do those things once would do them again." Lauren's voice was barely a whisper. "I'd tell her that she and her children deserved better."
Exactly.
"And that's all I'm doing for you. Protecting you and Clara the same way you would protect her." Over the next several weeks, I worked with the prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney James Morrison, to prepare for trial. We reviewed evidence, practiced testimony, and built an airtight case that would ensure Trent Mallory never again had the opportunity to destroy another family. The recordings Roxanne had provided were devastating. Hour after hour of Trent's voice, planning his escape from responsibility, joking about his wife's pregnancy, and scheming to steal money from his employer. Any jury that heard those recordings would understand exactly what kind of man they were dealing with. But Morrison wanted to be thorough. "Mrs. Stanley, the defense is going to paint you as a vindictive mother-in-law who manipulated this entire situation. They're going to argue that you acted too quickly, too decisively." "Let them try," I said. "I have documentation, witnesses, and a timeline that proves I acted in response to his abandonment, not as the instigator of some elaborate scheme." They'll also argue that your actions, freezing accounts, getting him fired, were excessive. My actions were protective. When someone abandons your daughter during a life-threatening medical emergency, you take steps to ensure they can't cause further harm. Morrison nodded. "And that's exactly how we'll present it to the jury." Beautiful souls, I need to pause here and speak directly to anyone who's ever been betrayed by someone they trusted completely. Your pain is valid, your anger is justified, and your determination to protect yourself and your loved ones is not only understandable, it's necessary. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. But remember, you are stronger than their betrayal, and you deserve so much better. Our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, has helped thousands of women rebuild their lives after devastating betrayals. It's filled with compassionate guidance for healing your heart and practical steps for creating the life you deserve. Click the link in the description and start your journey toward peace today. And please, if Bridget's story is resonating with you, hit that subscribe button. Your support means everything to us. The courthouse in downtown Portland was packed on the morning of Trent Mallory's trial. Word had spread through our social circles about the case. The successful businessman who had abandoned his dying wife to gamble with his mistress, and curiosity had drawn a crowd that included friends, acquaintances, and complete strangers who had read about the case in the newspapers. I arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, wearing my best charcoal suit and my mother's pearl necklace. Lauren had chosen to stay home with Clara, unable to face watching her husband's public destruction. I respected her decision, though part of me wished she could see this final chapter play out. ADA Morrison met me outside the courtroom. He was a man in his early 40s with the kind of sharp intelligence that comes from years of putting criminals behind bars. "Mrs. Stanley, are you ready for this?" "I've been ready since the day he abandoned my daughter," I replied. "Good. Because his defense attorney is going to try to paint you as a vindictive mother-in-law who manipulated this entire situation." I smiled. "Let her try. I have documentation, witnesses, and recordings." "What does she have?" "Desperate theories and character assassination attempts." Inside the courtroom, I took my seat in the front row behind the prosecution table. Across the aisle, I could see Patricia and Donald Mallory, Trent's parents, looking haggard and older than their years. Patricia avoided my eyes, but Donald nodded grimly in my direction. Trent himself looked like a different person than the confident man who had married my daughter 4 years ago. His hair was shorter, his face thinner, and his orange jumpsuit made him look diminished, powerless. When he glanced back at the gallery, his eyes found mine for just a moment before skittering away. Judge Malcolm Reddick called the court to order. At 61, he was known for his no-nonsense approach to white-collar crime and his particular distaste for defendants who victimized their own families. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," ADA Morrison began his opening statement. "This case is about a man who made a series of calculated choices that reveal his true character. When faced with the responsibility of supporting his pregnant wife, he chose to steal from his employer. When his wife went into labor with complications, he chose to gamble with his mistress in Las Vegas. When his premature daughter struggled for life in the NICU, he chose to stay in Nevada buying expensive gifts for his girlfriend." Morrison walked the jury through the timeline, the evidence, the recordings that would prove not just Trent's actions, but his intentions. He painted a picture of a man so self-centered, so lacking in basic human decency, that he could abandon his family during their greatest crisis. You will hear, in the defendant's own words, his plans to disappear to Las Vegas permanently, leaving his wife and newborn daughter with nothing. You will hear him laugh about his wife's pregnancy and joke about avoiding child support. This is not a case about a man who made a mistake. This is a case about a man who revealed his true nature when his family needed him most. Trent's defense attorney, Sandra Kellerman, had the unenviable task of defending the indefensible. Her opening statement focused on portraying Trent as a man under pressure who had made poor choices but didn't deserve to have his life destroyed. Ladies and gentlemen, my client is guilty of poor judgment. He's guilty of infidelity. He's guilty of gambling when he should have been more responsible. But the charges against him, criminal fraud, child abandonment, criminal negligence, these are serious felonies that should be reserved for truly malicious criminals, not a man who got in over his head. She tried to suggest that I had manipulated the situation, that my swift actions showed premeditation rather than protective instincts. But without evidence to support her theories, her arguments sounded hollow. The prosecution's case unfolded methodically over 3 days. Bank records showed the pattern of theft from Morrison and associates. Credit card statements proved Trent had used family money to finance his Las Vegas trip. Hospital records confirmed the timeline of Lauren's medical emergency and Trent's absence. But the most devastating evidence came when Roxanne Vale took the stand. She looked different than I expected. Less flashy, more ordinary. Dressed in a conservative suit with her blonde hair pulled back, she could have been anyone's daughter or sister. Ms. Vale, ADA Morrison said, "How did you meet the defendant?" "At a casino in Portland. He told me he was separated from his wife and planning to get divorced after the holidays." "Did he mention that his wife was pregnant?"
Not initially.
"When he finally told me, he said it was an accident, that he didn't want children, and that he was planning to move to Las Vegas after the divorce was final." Morrison played recording after recording. Trent's voice filled the courtroom, casual and callous as he described his plans to abandon his family, his schemes to steal from his company, his complete lack of regard for anyone but himself. The jury's expressions grew more disgusted with each revelation. When they heard Trent laugh about Lauren's pregnancy symptoms and joke about getting out of child support, several jurors actually shook their heads in disgust. Ms. Vale, Morrison continued, did the defendant ever express concern about his wife's welfare or his unborn child's welfare?
Never.
He only talked about them as obstacles to his freedom. When Kellerman cross-examined Roxanne, she tried to paint her as a vindictive ex-mistress, but Roxanne held her ground. "Isn't it true that you recorded these conversations without Mr. Mallory's knowledge?"
Yes.
"And isn't it true that you were angry when he abandoned you in Las Vegas?" "I was angry when I realized he had lied to me about everything. But I would have provided these recordings regardless of my personal feelings, because what he said about abandoning his wife and baby was wrong." On the 4th day, I took the stand. ADA Morrison walked me through the timeline of events, from the night Lauren went into labor to the moment I discovered Trent's location and activities. I spoke calmly, factually, letting the evidence speak for itself. "Mrs. Stanley, why did you freeze the joint accounts?" "Because my daughter was fighting for her life, and her husband was using their money to finance his affair instead of being at her bedside. Some might say your actions were extreme. Some might say abandoning your wife and newborn daughter is extreme. I simply did what any mother would do to protect her child." When Kellerman cross-examined me, she tried to make me appear vindictive and controlling. "Mrs. Stanley, isn't it true that you never approved of your daughter's marriage to Mr. Mallory?" "I had concerns about their compatibility, yes." "And isn't it true that you saw this crisis as an opportunity to end their marriage?" I looked directly at the jury. Ms. Kellerman, if I had wanted to end their marriage, I could have shown Lauren the evidence of his affair and gambling addiction at any time. I acted when I did because he abandoned my daughter during the most dangerous moment of her life. But you admit you acted quickly and decisively to destroy his financial situation? I acted quickly and decisively to protect my family from a man who had proven he couldn't be trusted with their welfare. The defense case was brief and unconvincing. Trent himself chose not to testify, probably because the recordings had already revealed his character more clearly than any courtroom testimony could have. During closing arguments, ADA Morrison summarized the case with devastating clarity. Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard the defendant in his own words, planning to abandon his wife and child. You have seen the evidence of his systematic theft from his employer. You have learned that while his wife fought for her life and his daughter struggled to survive, he was gambling away their future with his mistress. He paused, letting that sink in. This is not a case about a man who made mistakes. This is a case about a man who revealed his true character when it mattered most. And his character is that of someone who is fundamentally unfit to be trusted with anyone's welfare, financial or otherwise. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. On the charge of criminal fraud in the first degree, how do you find? Guilty, Your Honor. On the charge of embezzlement in the first degree, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of criminal child abandonment, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of criminal negligence, how do you find? Guilty. As the verdicts were read, I watched Trent's face crumble. His parents were crying. His attorney looked defeated. But I felt only satisfaction. Justice had been served, and my family was safe. Sentencing day arrived on a crisp February morning, exactly 4 months after Clara's birth. I arrived at the courthouse early, wanting to secure a good seat for what I knew would be the final chapter in Trent Mallory's downfall. Lauren had asked to come with me this time. She said she needed to see it through, needed to hear the judge's final words about the man she had once loved. Clara was being watched by my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who had become an invaluable help during Lauren's recovery. The courtroom was less crowded than it had been during the trial, but the atmosphere was even more tense. This was the moment when abstract concepts of justice would become concrete reality, when Trent would learn exactly what his choices had cost him. Judge Reddick called the court to order and reviewed the case file one final time. Then he looked directly at Trent. Mr. Mallory, you have been convicted by a jury of your peers of multiple felony charges. Before I impose sentence, I want to address the nature of your crimes and their impact on the victims. The judge's voice carried the weight of years spent dealing with the worst of human nature, but there was a particular steel in his tone that suggested this case had affected him personally. In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen defendants who committed crimes of desperation, defendants who acted out of mental illness, defendants who simply made poor choices in difficult circumstances. You are not one of those defendants. The evidence presented at trial shows that your crimes were calculated, premeditated, and utterly without regard for the welfare of your own family. You systematically stole from your employer while planning to abandon your wife and newborn child. When your wife faced a life-threatening medical emergency, you chose to continue gambling with your mistress rather than return to her bedside. Judge Reddick paused, letting that sink in. But what I find most troubling, Mr. Mallory, are the recordings we heard during trial. Your own words revealed a level of callousness toward your family that is truly shocking. You laughed about your wife's pregnancy difficulties. You joked about avoiding child support. You planned to disappear to Las Vegas permanently, leaving your wife and daughter with nothing. Lauren's hand found mine, and I squeezed it gently. The court has received several letters asking for leniency, the judge continued, including one from your parents. But the court has also received impact statements from the victims of your crimes. I had spent hours crafting my victim impact statement, wanting to capture not just the financial damage Trent had caused, but the deeper betrayal of trust that had nearly destroyed my daughter. Mrs. Lauren Stanley writes, "My husband's abandonment during the most dangerous moment of my life has left scars that may never heal. When I was fighting for my life after our daughter's birth, he was gambling away our future. When our premature baby needed both her parents, he chose his selfish desires over her welfare. I trusted him with my heart, my life, and my child's future. His betrayal of that trust has fundamentally changed who I am as a person." I felt Lauren's shoulders shake slightly as her words were read aloud. Mrs. Bridget Stanley writes, "The defendant's actions nearly cost me my daughter and put my granddaughter at risk. His theft of family funds during a medical crisis showed a callousness that defies comprehension. But beyond the financial crimes, his emotional abandonment of his family during their greatest need reveals a character that is fundamentally unfit for the responsibilities of marriage and parenthood." Judge Reddick set down the papers and looked directly at Trent again. "Mr. Mallory, do you have anything to say before I impose sentence?" Trent stood slowly, his legs shaking. His attorney had obviously coached him, but I could see the struggle between his coached remorse and his natural arrogance. "Your Honor," he began, his voice barely audible, "I know I made terrible mistakes. I hurt people I loved, and I take full responsibility for my actions." It was the right thing to say, but it sounded hollow, rehearsed. Judge Reddick waited a moment to see if Trent had more to say. When it became clear he didn't, the judge nodded. "Mr. Mallory, the court finds that your crimes were serious, calculated, and caused substantial harm to your victims. The evidence shows a pattern of behavior that prioritized your own selfish desires over the most basic responsibilities of marriage and parenthood." The judge consulted his notes one final time. "On the charge of criminal fraud in the first degree, I sentence you to 8 years in state prison. On the charge of embezzlement in the first degree, I sentence you to 6 years in state prison. On the charge of criminal child abandonment, I sentence you to 5 years in state prison. On the charge of criminal negligence, I sentence you to 3 years in state prison." I held my breath, waiting for the crucial detail. "These sentences will run consecutively, not concurrently, for a total of 22 years in state prison." The courtroom erupted. Patricia Mallory screamed. Donald slumped forward in his seat. Trent's attorney immediately began talking about appeals. But Trent himself just stood there, staring at the judge as if he couldn't comprehend what he'd just heard. 22 years. By the time he was released, Clara would be in college. Lauren would have rebuilt her entire life. I might not even be alive to see his release. Furthermore, Judge Reddick continued, "You are ordered to pay full restitution to Morrison and Associates in the amount of $67,000, plus interest and penalties. You are prohibited from contacting the victims directly or indirectly for the duration of your sentence and for 10 years following your release." As the bailiffs prepared to escort Trent back to prison, he turned toward our section of the courtroom. His eyes found Lauren first, and I saw her recoil slightly from the intensity of his gaze. Then he looked at me. For a moment, we stared at each other across the courtroom. The man who had tried to destroy my family and the woman who had destroyed his life in return. I kept my expression neutral, dignified, but I wanted him to see the satisfaction in my eyes. He had gambled with the wrong family, and now he would spend the next 2 decades paying for that mistake. 6 months have passed since Trent Mallory was sentenced to 22 years in prison. As I write this, Clara is sleeping peacefully in her crib upstairs, and Lauren is working on her laptop at my kitchen table, taking online courses to complete her teaching degree. The house feels different now, lighter, somehow. The shadow of Trent's presence has been lifted, replaced by the gentle rhythms of 3 generations of women building a life together. Lauren has filed for divorce, of course. The proceedings were swift and uncontested, difficult to mount a defense from a prison cell. She was awarded full custody of Clara, the house, and what remained of their joint assets after restitution was paid. But more than the legal victories, what strikes me is how Lauren has blossomed in Trent's absence. The nervous, apologetic woman who used to make excuses for her husband's behavior has been replaced by someone stronger, more confident, more at peace with herself and her choices. "Mom," she said to me last week as we watched Clara take her first tentative steps across my living room, "I need to thank you." "For what?" "For seeing what I couldn't see. For protecting us when I was too weak to protect myself." I smoothed Clara's hair as she tumbled into my arms, giggling with the pure joy that only babies possess. "You weren't weak, sweetheart. You were loyal. There's nothing wrong with giving someone the benefit of the doubt. But you knew, from the beginning, you knew what kind of man he was." I had known, or at least suspected. There had been signs, the gambling, the secretive phone calls, the way he looked at Lauren when he thought no one was watching. But knowing and proving are different things, and I had needed solid evidence before I could act. "I knew he was selfish," I said. "I didn't know he was capable of abandoning you while you were dying. Do you ever regret what you did? The way you destroyed his life so completely?" I considered the question carefully. It wasn't the first time Lauren had asked it, and I suspected it wouldn't be the last. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret protecting my family from someone who had proven himself to be dangerous to their welfare. But 22 years. 22 years means Clara will be an adult before he's released. She'll be old enough to make her own decisions about whether she wants him in her life. And if she does, she'll do it from a position of strength, not as a child who never knew any different." That evening, after Lauren and Clara had gone to bed, I sat in my living room with a glass of wine and thought about the path that had brought us to this point. Some people might say I had been too harsh, too calculating, too unforgiving. They might argue that family should mean something, that everyone deserves redemption, that revenge is never the answer. But those people had never held their dying daughter's hand while her husband gambled with his mistress. They had never watched a premature baby fight for life, while her father chose casino tables over his family's welfare. I received one letter from Trent about 3 months after his sentencing. He wrote from the state penitentiary, asking for forgiveness, claiming he had found religion and wanted to make amends. He begged me to bring Clara to visit him, to allow him to be part of his daughter's life. I read the letter twice, then fed it into my paper shredder. Some people deserve second chances. But some people forfeit that right when they show you exactly who they are in the moment when character matters most. Trent Mallory revealed himself to be someone who would abandon a dying wife and a struggling newborn for the thrill of a casino table and the company of his mistress. That revelation cannot be unrevealed, no matter how many Bible verses he might quote from his prison cell. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Detective Haverford. "Mrs. Stanley, I wanted to update you on something. We've been contacted by authorities in Nevada about additional charges against Mr. Mallory." "What kind of charges?" "Apparently, he ran up significant debts in Las Vegas that he couldn't pay. There's evidence of check fraud and identity theft. The Nevada DA is interested in extraditing him for prosecution after he serves his time here." I felt a grim satisfaction. Even from prison, Trent's past was catching up with him. How much additional time might he face? Hard to say. But it could add another 5 to 7 years to his sentence. After hanging up, I reflected on the call. Trent's suffering wasn't bringing me joy, exactly, but it was bringing me peace. The man who had nearly destroyed my family was facing consequences that matched the scope of his betrayal. Clara stirred in her monitor upstairs, making the soft sounds that babies make as they settle into deeper sleep. I checked on her, adjusting her blanket and smoothing her hair. She looked so much like Lauren at that age, the same delicate features, the same stubborn chin that marked her as a Stanley woman. Your daddy made some very poor choices, little one, I whispered to her sleeping form. But don't worry. Grandma Bridget made sure those choices have consequences. You're safe now. You're loved. And you're never going to have to wonder if the people who are supposed to protect you will actually be there when you need them most. As I prepared for bed that night, I felt a profound sense of completion. Justice had been served. My family was safe. And Clara would grow up knowing that when someone threatens the people you love, you respond with swift and overwhelming force. Some stories end with forgiveness and reconciliation, but some stories end with justice and protection. This was one of the latter, and I was proud of every single moment of it. 2 years have passed since that phone call at 3:17 a.m. changed everything. As I write this final chapter, Clara is taking her first wobbly steps across my living room, her laughter filling a house that has known too much sorrow and is finally learning joy again. Lauren completed her teaching degree and now works at the local elementary school. She bought a small house just 10 minutes from mine, close enough for daily visits, but far enough to establish her independence. She's dating a wonderful man named David who teaches at the same school, a kind, steady person who treats Clara like his own daughter and looks at Lauren like she's the most precious thing in the world.
Because she is.
I often think about the woman I was before that phone call changed everything. I was a widow, comfortable but somewhat aimless, still grieving my husband and wondering what purpose my life held. I thought my most important days were behind me. I was wrong. The day I decided to protect my family from Trent Mallory was the day I discovered that age doesn't make you weak, it makes you precise. That experience doesn't make you fragile, it makes you formidable. That having lived through loss and heartbreak doesn't diminish you, it teaches you exactly what's worth fighting for. Last month, I received a call from a young woman named Sarah whose husband had abandoned her during a cancer diagnosis to pursue his secretary. She had heard about my case through mutual friends and wanted advice. "Mrs. Stanley," she said, her voice shaking, "I don't know what to do. He cleaned out our savings account and left me with nothing but medical bills. Everyone tells me I should try to work it out, that marriages go through rough patches." "Sarah," I said gently, "let me ask you something. If your daughter came to you 20 years from now and told you her husband had abandoned her during cancer treatment, what would you tell her to do?" "I'd tell her to leave him," she said immediately. "Then you have your answer." I spent 2 hours on the phone with Sarah that day, walking her through the steps I had taken to protect Lauren and Clara. By the end of our conversation, she had a plan of action and the phone numbers of the best divorce attorney and private investigator in her city. 6 weeks later, she called to tell me her husband had been arrested for fraud and embezzlement. His secretary had abandoned him the moment his money ran out. Sarah was cancer-free and financially secure, having successfully recovered the assets he had stolen from their joint accounts. "You saved my life," she told me. "No," I replied, "you saved your own life. I just showed you that you had the power to do it." That conversation made me realize something important. My experience with Trent wasn't just about protecting my own family. It was about learning lessons that could help other women in similar situations. I've started writing a book about my experience, not this story, but a practical guide for women who find themselves betrayed by the men they trusted most. A handbook for protection, for justice, for ensuring that actions have appropriate consequences. The working title is When Love Becomes War, A Mother's Guide to Protecting Your Family. Yesterday, I was in my garden when I saw a young woman walking past my house, pushing a stroller and crying. Something about her posture, her dejected slump, reminded me of Lauren during those dark days when she was making excuses for Trent's behavior. I invited her in for tea. Her name was Michelle, and her story was heartbreakingly familiar. Husband gambling away their savings. Mysterious late nights and secretive phone calls. A baby who deserved better than a father who saw his family as an obstacle to his freedom. "I don't know what to do," she said, cradling her 6-month-old son. "Everyone says I should give him another chance, that he's under stress from work." I looked at this young woman, so much like my daughter had been, and felt the familiar fire kindle in my chest. "Michelle," I said, setting down my teacup, "let me tell you what I learned when my daughter's husband abandoned her while she was dying." 2 hours later, Michelle left my house with a plan, a phone number for Detective Haverford, and most importantly, the knowledge that she didn't have to accept betrayal simply because it came from someone who was supposed to love her. Clara toddled over to me as I was cleaning up the tea service, reaching up to be held. I scooped her into my arms and carried her to the window, where we could see Michelle walking down the street with a straighter spine and a more determined stride. "That woman is about to change her life, little one," I told Clara. "She's about to learn that she's stronger than she knows." Clara babbled something that might have been agreement and reached for my pearl necklace, the one Martin had given me and that had become my armor during the battle for my family's future. As the sun set over my garden, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. Some people might read this story and think I was too harsh, too calculating, too unforgiving. They might say that family should mean something, that everyone deserves redemption, that revenge is never the answer. Those people have never been forced to choose between mercy and protection. They've never had to decide whether to forgive someone who showed them their true nature in a moment of crisis. I chose protection. I chose consequences. I chose to ensure that a man who would abandon his dying wife and newborn daughter would face justice that matched the scope of his betrayal. And I would make the same choice again tomorrow, and every day after that. My name is Bridget Stanley. I am 66 years old, and I am the grandmother of the most beautiful little girl in the world. I am also the woman who destroyed a man who threatened my family. Some call it revenge. I call it love in its most fierce and protective form. Clara fell asleep in my arms as the stars came out, and I carried her upstairs to her crib. As I tucked her in, I whispered the same promise I had made to her the night her father was sentenced. "You're safe now, sweetheart. You're loved. And you're never going to have to wonder if the people who are supposed to protect you will actually be there when you need them most. Because the people we love deserve protection, even when that protection comes at a price. Especially when it comes at a price. And if that makes me ruthless, then I will gladly be ruthless. Because some things are worth any price, and the safety of the people I love is at the top of that list." As I write these final words, I can hear Lauren humming in the kitchen as she prepares Clara's bottle for the morning. It's a sound of contentment, of security, of a woman who has learned that she deserves better than betrayal and abandonment. Trent Mallory gambled with the wrong family. He thought he could abandon his wife and daughter without consequences, steal from his employer without detection, and manipulate everyone around him without accountability. He was wrong on all counts. Justice isn't always served in courtrooms. Sometimes it's served by a 64-year-old woman with pearl earrings and a fierce determination to protect her family. Sometimes it's served by freezing bank accounts at 4 a.m. and making phone calls that destroy careers and reputations. Sometimes justice looks like a mother's love armed with resources, intelligence, and an absolute refusal to let anyone harm her child. Trent will spend the next 22 years learning that actions have consequences. My daughter will spend those same years rebuilding her life, raising her daughter, and discovering that she's stronger than she ever imagined. And I will spend them knowing that when my family needed protection, I provided it.
Completely. Permanently.
Without apology. That's what love looks like when it's tested by betrayal. That's what a mother does when someone threatens her child. And that's why some people should be very careful about the families they choose to destroy. Because some of us destroy back. Beautiful souls, as Bridget's story comes to an end, I want you to remember something powerful. You are never too old to be fierce, never too tired to fight for what matters, and never too vulnerable to be victorious. Bridget's strength didn't come from hatred. It came from love. Love for her daughter, love for her granddaughter, and ultimately, love for herself and her own worth. If you're going through your own season of betrayal or struggle, remember that you have more power than you know. Our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, will help you find that power and use it to build the life you deserve. Click the link in the description. Your breakthrough is waiting. Please subscribe for more incredible stories of women who refuse to be victims, and remember, your story is still being written and you get to decide how it ends.